Daniel Mercer thought his German Shepherd was losing his mind when Rex started barking at the frozen lake at 2 a.m., but then Daniel saw something impossible glowing beneath the ice. The lights moved like lanterns underwater, and when Rex ran onto the cracking surface, Daniel followed and discovered a metal staircase hidden below the lake for over 40 years. Inside was a frozen room still humming with power, and a photograph of a little girl holding the same teddy bear his daughter Emily owned before she died. Then the old emergency radio suddenly turned on by itself, and a voice whispered, "If anyone finds this, tell Daniel we kept our promise." Dogs don't bark at empty ice. The old man at the gas station had warned Daniel Mercer 3 days earlier, but standing alone beneath the pale Minnesota moon with freezing wind cutting through his coat, Daniel suddenly understood exactly what he meant. The barking wasn't normal. Rex stood near the center of Black Hollow Lake with his ears pinned forward and his massive body tense beneath the falling snow, growling low into the darkness like he sensed something alive under the frozen surface. Daniel tightened his gloves and stepped carefully across the thick ice, his boots crunching softly while icy wind rolled over the lake in long hollow waves. The entire town had disappeared into silence hours ago. No headlights, no voices. Just snow drifting through the pine trees and the distant sound of Rex barking harder with every passing second. "Easy, boy," Daniel whispered, though his own voice sounded uncertain in the cold. Rex didn't move. The German Shepherd stared downward, directly beneath his paws, and then something impossible happened. A faint yellow light flickered under the ice. Daniel froze instantly. At first he thought it was a reflection from somewhere behind him, but there was nothing there except the dark shoreline and his old pickup truck parked beside the road nearly 200 feet away. The light beneath the lake moved slowly, almost like a lantern drifting underwater. Then another appeared, and another. 3 soft golden lights gliding silently beneath 4 feet of solid ice. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The lights weren't random. They moved together, purposefully. Rex barked violently now, claws scraping the frozen surface as snow gathered along his back. Daniel crouched lower and brushed away fresh powder with his gloved hand. Beneath the cloudy ice, the lights shimmered again, and for one brief second, he thought he saw the outline of metal stairs descending into darkness below the lake. His pulse hammered painfully against his ribs. Black Hollow Lake had always carried stories. Missing fishermen, strange sounds during winter storms, children claiming they saw lights moving under the ice decades ago. Daniel had ignored all of it. After losing his daughter Emily 6 years earlier, he stopped believing in stories entirely. Grief had a way of making the world feel smaller and colder than winter itself. But tonight felt different. The air itself felt heavy, almost listening. Rex suddenly stopped barking. The silence that followed was worse. The dog stood completely still, staring downward with ears raised high. Then a low humming sound vibrated beneath the ice. Daniel stepped back instinctively. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Machinery. Old machinery. Somewhere deep under the frozen lake, something still had power. Snow blew harder now, swirling around Daniel as the yellow lights slowly faded deeper into the darkness below. He should have left. Every rational thought in his mind told him to get back to the truck and drive away before the storm trapped him out there overnight. But then Rex lowered his nose against the ice and let out the softest whine Daniel had ever heard from him. Not fear, sadness. And that was when Daniel noticed something half buried beneath the snow near his boot. A small rusted metal handle frozen into the surface of the lake. Daniel knelt slowly beside the rusted handle while snow drifted across the frozen lake in thin silver ribbons. Rex stayed perfectly still beside him, staring into the cloudy ice with low, uneasy breaths fogging into the bitter night air. The humming beneath the lake had stopped, but Daniel could still feel a faint vibration through his boots, almost like an old engine buried far below the frozen surface. He brushed more snow aside with trembling gloves until the shape became clearer. It was not random debris. The handle was attached to a square metal hatch sealed directly into the ice. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. Black Hollow Lake froze solid every winter, sometimes nearly 4 feet thick. Yet somehow this hatch sat perfectly embedded beneath the surface like it had been waiting there for decades. Rex suddenly stepped backward and gave a sharp bark toward the tree line behind them. Daniel turned quickly, but the shoreline remained empty except for dark pine trees swaying softly in the wind. Then he heard it again, a distant metallic creak somewhere beneath the ice. Slow, hollow, almost like a heavy door opening underwater. His chest tightened. Every instinct told him to leave immediately, but another feeling kept him frozen there beside the hatch. Curiosity mixed with something older than fear. Grief had left Daniel hollow for years, but tonight, standing in the middle of that silent lake beneath the pale moonlight, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small flashlight he carried during winter walks. The beam cut through the falling snow and illuminated the frozen surface around the hatch. That was when he noticed faint markings etched into the metal, letters almost erased by time. U.S. Army Corps. Daniel swallowed hard. His military instincts immediately sharpened. The hatch was old, maybe from the 1970s or earlier, but military equipment had a certain look that never disappeared completely. Functional. Cold. Built to survive. Rex moved closer again, pressing his nose near the edge of the hatch before letting out another soft whine. Daniel had heard that sound only a few times before, usually when Rex sensed someone injured or emotionally distressed. It was never random. Slowly, Daniel crouched lower and aimed the flashlight through a thin crack along the edge of the metal. At first he saw nothing except darkness. Then the light reflected off something below. Stairs. Metal stairs descending deep beneath the frozen lake. Daniel's pulse quickened violently. The staircase disappeared into black water and shadows far below, but faint yellow light still flickered somewhere deeper underneath. Not electrical sparks. Not reflections. Real light. Moving slowly like lanterns swaying in darkness. A freezing gust swept across the lake hard enough to force Daniel upright. Snow curled around him while the trees along the shoreline groaned softly in the wind. For a brief second, he thought he heard distant voices carried across the ice. Not clear words, just echoes. Rex suddenly spun toward the center of the lake and barked loudly again. The ice beneath them answered with a low cracking sound. Daniel stepped back instinctively, heart pounding, but the crack did not spread. Instead, a thin line of frost shifted away from the hatch, revealing something trapped beneath the surface nearby. Daniel moved closer carefully and brushed fresh snow aside with both hands. His flashlight beam landed on faded blue fabric frozen beneath the ice. Fabric attached to something small, something shaped like a child's winter coat. Daniel stopped breathing, because sewn onto the coat, barely visible beneath years of ice and frost, was a tiny embroidered name stitched in white thread. Emily. Daniel stared at the frozen coat beneath the ice while every breath burned cold in his lungs. Snow drifted softly around him, but the world no longer felt real. Emily. The stitched white letters were faded with age, yet unmistakable. His daughter's name. For several long seconds he could not move at all. Rex pressed against his side quietly, his warm fur brushing Daniel's frozen hand, as if the dog understood exactly what that tiny coat meant. Emily had died 6 years earlier in a hospital nearly 200 miles away after a sudden illness that doctors never fully explained. She had never been to Black Hollow Lake. Daniel knew that. He had spent years replaying every memory of her life inside his mind, and not once had this place been part of it. Yet somehow her name rested beneath 4 feet of ice in the middle of a forgotten lake surrounded by stories nobody wanted to discuss. The wind slowed until the entire lake fell unnaturally still. Then the lights beneath. The ice appeared again, dim golden shapes drifting far below the frozen surface. Daniel backed away slowly, unable to tear his eyes from them. Rex let out another low growl, but this time the sound carried confusion more than warning. Daniel forced himself to breathe steadily and crouched again beside the small coat trapped beneath the frost. He brushed more snow aside carefully, revealing pale blue fabric covered in tiny silver stars. His chest tightened painfully. Emily had owned a coat almost exactly like it when she was 7 years old. For a brief, terrifying moment, Daniel wondered if grief itself was beginning to distort reality around him. But then he noticed something else frozen beside the coat. A photograph. Only part of it was visible beneath the cloudy ice, but Daniel could make out the image of a little girl standing beside a snowy shoreline with pine trees behind her. The child held a stuffed bear against her chest and smiled toward the camera. Daniel's knees nearly gave out beneath him. Emily had owned that same bear. Not similar. The same one. A faded red ribbon still wrapped around its neck. That is impossible, Daniel whispered into the freezing air. Rex suddenly barked sharply toward the far side of the lake. Daniel looked up just as one of the golden lights beneath the ice stopped moving directly below them. The glow strengthened slowly until the frozen surface shimmered faintly amber beneath his boots. Then the humming sound returned louder than before. Deep, mechanical, ancient. Daniel stepped backward instinctively as thin cracks of frost spread outward across the ice around the hatch like spiderweb veins. Somewhere below them, gears groaned awake after decades of silence. The metal handle trembled beneath the snow. Daniel's military training forced his mind into focus despite the fear rising through him. Old underground structures sometimes had emergency generators designed to activate automatically under pressure changes or movement. But no system should still function after 40 years beneath a frozen lake. Unless someone maintained it. Or something did. Rex lowered himself protectively in front of Daniel and stared directly at the hatch. The dog's ears stood high, every muscle tense beneath his thick winter fur. Then came the sound that made Daniel's blood run cold. A child's laughter. Soft, distant, carried upward from somewhere below the ice. Daniel spun around instantly, searching the empty lake, but there was nobody there. Only darkness, snow, silence. The laughter came again, quieter this time, followed by a faint voice nearly swallowed by the wind. Daddy. Daniel stopped breathing. Tears burned instantly in his eyes as memories crashed through him without warning. Emily laughing beside campfires. Emily falling asleep in the passenger seat during long drives. Emily whispering goodnight from the hospital bed 3 days before she died. Rex nudged Daniel's hand firmly, pulling him back into the freezing present. The golden light beneath the hatch suddenly brightened one final time. Then somewhere deep under Black Hollow Lake, a loud metallic lock clicked open. The sound of the lock echoed beneath the frozen lake like something waking from a long-forgotten sleep. Daniel stood frozen beside the hatch while snow spiraled around him under the pale moonlight. Rex barked once and stepped backward, his breath rising heavily into the cold air. The metal handle trembled again, and slowly, almost painfully, the square hatch lifted an inch from the ice with a deep grinding sound that vibrated through the lake beneath their feet. Daniel stared in disbelief as warm air drifted upward through the opening, carrying the faint scent of dust, rust, and old electricity. No place buried beneath a frozen lake for decades should still feel alive. Yet somehow this one did. Daniel swallowed hard and moved closer carefully. The gap widened another few inches, revealing darkness below and the faint glow of yellow emergency lights flickering far beneath the surface. Metal stairs descended downward into shadows that seemed impossibly deep. Rex stayed close beside him now, but the dog no longer growled. Instead, he watched the opening with focused attention, almost like he recognized something waiting below. Daniel's heartbeat pounded loudly in his ears. Every survival instinct told him this place was dangerous. Unstable ice. Unknown structure. Hidden military facility buried beneath a lake no one talked about anymore. But another feeling pulled him forward stronger than fear itself. Emily's name. Her coat. The voice he had heard beneath the ice. None of it made sense. Yet grief had taught Daniel one painful truth over the years. Some questions never stopped calling for answers. He pulled the flashlight from his coat pocket and aimed it downward through the opening. The beam illuminated old steel stairs coated in frost, disappearing nearly 30 feet below into a circular chamber lined with pipes and rusted walls. Tiny emergency bulbs still glowed weakly along the staircase, flickering every few seconds like fading stars. Daniel took one careful step downward. The metal groaned softly beneath his weight. Warm air rose from below while snow continued falling silently above them. Rex followed immediately behind him. As the hatch slowly settled open above their heads, the sounds of the outside world faded away. No wind, no trees, only the distant hum echoing upward through the hidden structure beneath the lake. Daniel descended slowly, gripping the icy railing while his flashlight beam moved across faded warning signs bolted along the walls. Most of the letters had peeled away with time, but one message remained partially visible beneath layers of rust. Restricted Research Division. Another sign lower down read Emergency Shelter Access. Daniel frowned deeply. None of this matched any military operation he had ever heard about during his years of service. The staircase finally ended inside a narrow corridor lined with old pipes dripping condensation onto the floor. The air felt strangely warm compared to the freezing storm above. Dim yellow lights flickered overhead, while ancient ventilation fans turned somewhere deep inside the structure with slow, uneven rhythms. Rex moved ahead cautiously, claws clicking softly against the metal floor. Then the dog stopped abruptly beside a wall covered in photographs. Daniel's breath caught instantly. Dozens of faded pictures had been pinned there decades earlier. Families, scientists, workers standing beside the lake during winters. Long past. Children smiling beside snowbanks and cabins. Daniel stepped closer slowly until his flashlight landed on one photograph near the center of the wall. A little girl wearing a blue coat with silver stars stood beside a tall man near the shoreline of Black Hollow Lake. The girl held a stuffed bear with a faded red ribbon tied around its neck. Daniel felt his knees weaken beneath him, because the man standing beside her was him, younger by many years, but unmistakably him. And yet Daniel had never been to Black Hollow Lake before tonight. Daniel stepped closer to the photograph with slow, unsteady breaths while the weak yellow lights above flickered across the old metal corridor. The image pinned to the wall could not exist. He knew every photograph ever taken of Emily because after her death they had become the only pieces of life he could still hold on to. Yet this picture showed him standing beside her at Black Hollow Lake years before he had ever heard the town's name. His younger face looked tired but peaceful, one hand resting gently on Emily's shoulder while snow drifted around them beneath gray winter skies. Rex stood beside Daniel in the photograph too, though much younger, wearing an old military service harness Daniel had packed away long ago. Daniel slowly reached toward the picture with trembling fingers. The paper felt dry and brittle with age. On the back someone had written a date in faded black ink. December 18th, 2011. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. That date meant nothing at first until memory suddenly struck him hard enough to steal the air from his lungs. December 18th, 2011 was the night Emily nearly died during a terrible winter highway accident outside Duluth. Daniel had driven through a blizzard for hours trying to reach the nearest hospital while Emily drifted in and out of consciousness beside him. He remembered snow, darkness, fear. But there had been moments during that storm he could never fully explain. Strange missing hours. Roads he did not remember driving. Emily talking softly about lights outside the truck windows while he struggled to stay awake behind the wheel. At the time he blamed exhaustion and panic. But now his hands shook violently as he stared at the photograph. Because behind them in the picture stood the frozen shoreline of Black Hollow Lake. That is not possible, Daniel whispered again. Rex suddenly moved deeper into the corridor, claws echoing softly against the metal floor. Daniel followed slowly while old ventilation fans hummed somewhere overhead like distant breathing. The underground structure stretched farther than he expected, lined with sealed doors covered in rust and faded military markings. Some windows revealed abandoned rooms filled with old computers, filing cabinets, and broken equipment covered in dust thick enough to hide decades. Yet despite the decay, electricity still flowed weakly through the station. Lights flickered. Machines hummed softly. Somewhere deep below, generators still lived. Rex stopped beside a heavy steel door near the end of the corridor and stared at it silently. The words observation room B remained barely visible across the surface. Daniel pushed carefully against the handle. The hinges groaned loudly as the door slowly opened inward. Warm air drifted out carrying the scent of old paper and machine oil. Inside, the room looked frozen in time. Coffee mugs sat untouched beside dusty monitors. Winter coats still hung near the wall. A small Christmas decoration rested on one desk beneath layers of dust, as though workers had simply disappeared in the middle of an ordinary day. Daniel moved farther inside while Rex stayed near the doorway watching the shadows. Then Daniel noticed a tape recorder sitting alone on the center table. Unlike everything else in the room, it looked clean, recently used. A small red light blinked slowly on its side. Daniel's pulse quickened. He reached toward the machine carefully and pressed the play button. Static crackled softly through the speakers. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then a woman's voice filled the room, shaky and exhausted. If anyone finds this station, you need to know the lights are not dangerous. They are memories. Daniel froze completely. The voice continued through waves of static. The lake reacts to grief. That is why it called him back. Rex suddenly growled low, beneath his breath as the lights overhead flickered violently. Then from somewhere deeper inside the underground station came the sound of a child humming softly in the dark. The soft humming of the child's voice drifted through the underground station like a memory refusing to fade. Daniel stood motionless inside the observation room, while the old tape recorder continued spinning beside him with quiet mechanical clicks. Rex moved first. The German shepherd stepped into the hallway with ears raised high and began walking slowly toward the deeper sections of the station as though following a sound only he could fully understand. Daniel grabbed the flashlight tighter and followed close behind, his boots echoing softly against the cold metal floor. The deeper they moved underground, the warmer the air became. Pipes rattled faintly behind the walls while weak emergency lights blinked overhead in uneven rhythms. Some doors along the corridor remained sealed shut with rusted chains, and warning labels faded almost beyond recognition. Others stood slightly open, revealing abandoned bunk rooms frozen in time. Blankets still folded neatly on beds. Coffee cups resting beside dusty radios. Calendars hanging crookedly on walls stopped forever in December of 2011. Daniel felt unease settle heavily into his chest. Somebody had stayed here much longer than the town believed. Rex suddenly stopped near the end of the corridor beside a narrow staircase descending farther underground. The humming voice became clearer there. A little girl softly singing a lullaby Daniel had not heard in years. His heart nearly stopped. Emily used to sing the same song every night when she could not sleep during thunderstorms. Daniel gripped the railing tightly as memories flooded through him with painful clarity. He remembered sitting beside her hospital bed while snow fell outside the window. He remembered promising her they would go somewhere peaceful together once she got better. Somewhere with pine trees and frozen lakes. Somewhere quiet. Daniel slowly descended the staircase while Rex stayed only one step ahead. At the bottom waited a circular chamber filled with old monitors and massive glass. Windows overlooking dark water beyond the station walls. The underground structure sat directly beneath the center of Black Hollow Lake. Faint golden lights drifted outside the glass like slow-moving stars beneath the frozen water. Daniel stared in silent disbelief. They were beautiful, calm, almost alive. The humming voice stopped suddenly. Silence filled the chamber. Then one of the old monitors crackled awake by itself. Static rolled across the dusty screen before slowly forming the image of a man wearing a military research uniform. The footage looked old and damaged, but the man's tired eyes stared directly into the camera with terrifying seriousness. "If Daniel Mercer returns," the man said softly, "tell him we are sorry." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The recording continued through bursts of static. The lake responded differently to Emily. She could hear the lights more clearly than anyone else. "We believed the phenomenon could preserve emotional memory. We thought we were helping grieving families reconnect with lost loved ones." Daniel's hands trembled violently now. The golden lights outside the glass drifted closer together as if listening. But the deeper the grief, the man continued, the stronger the connection became. Emily opened a doorway we could not control. The screen flickered violently before cutting to black. Rex let out a low, uneasy growl toward the water outside the glass wall. Daniel slowly turned toward the drifting lights beneath the lake. One light separated from the others and moved directly toward the window until it hovered only inches beyond the thick glass. Warm golden light filled the chamber softly, and inside that glow, Daniel saw the faint outline of a little girl holding a stuffed bear against her chest. Daniel could not breathe as the golden figure hovered beyond the thick glass beneath the frozen lake. The outline was faint and shimmering like light through deep water, yet every part of him recognized the small shape standing there with the stuffed bear pressed gently against her chest. Emily. Rex stood motionless beside Daniel now, no longer growling, only watching quietly with his ears lowered as if he understood this moment did not belong to fear. The chamber glowed softly gold while snow filtered dimly through the ice far above them. Daniel stepped closer to the glass with trembling hands. The little figure beyond the window lifted one arm slowly. Not waving. Reaching. Tears filled Daniel's eyes instantly. "Emily," he whispered. The lights outside pulsed gently at the sound of her name. Then every monitor inside the chamber suddenly flickered on at once. Static burst through old speakers overhead, while dusty screens filled with fragmented recordings from years past. Faces appeared and vanished through the interference. Scientists, soldiers, families sitting beside hospital beds, children laughing during snowstorms. Moments of grief frozen inside fading light. Daniel stared around the chamber in disbelief as voices overlapped softly through the static. Some crying, some praying, some simply whispering names of people they had lost. The lake had not been storing bodies beneath the ice. It had been storing memories. A soft female voice suddenly spoke clearly through the speakers. Emotional resonance remained strongest in subjects experiencing unresolved grief. Daniel recognized the voice immediately from the tape recorder upstairs. Another monitor crackled alive, revealing the same tired researcher seated before the camera years earlier. Her eyes looked exhausted but gentle. Black Hollow was never meant to become a military operation, she explained softly. The lights were discovered accidentally beneath the lake during seismic surveys in the 1970s. We believe they were a rare natural energy phenomenon connected to human memory patterns. Daniel slowly approached the screen while the golden figure remained waiting beyond the glass. Most people only saw reflections, the woman continued. But children heard voices, especially children carrying strong emotional bonds. Emily was different from the beginning. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. The researcher lowered her eyes before speaking again. During the winter storm of 2011, your truck went off the highway less than 3 miles from this station. You and Emily were brought here unconscious. During the blizzard, Daniel felt dizzy suddenly. Fragments of memory crashed through his mind. Bright lights through snow. Strange warm hallways. Emily smiling weakly while whispering about stars under the lake. The storm destroyed communication lines, the researcher said quietly. We kept Emily stable overnight until emergency crews could reach the area. But something happened while she was here. The monitors flickered violently as the golden lights outside drifted faster through the dark water. Emily connected to the phenomenon in ways we did not understand. She could hear memories inside the lights. She said lonely people became trapped inside them after death unless someone remembered them. Daniel pressed one hand against the glass as tears rolled silently down his face. Beyond the window, the small glowing figure mirrored the movement gently. After you left the station, the researcher continued, Emily asked us to promise something. Static swallowed the room briefly before the final words came through clearly. She said if her father ever became lost in grief, the lake would bring him back. Silence filled the chamber. Only the distant hum of generators remained. Daniel stood motionless beside the glowing glass while Rex rested quietly against his leg. Then the little figure outside slowly pointed deeper into the darkness beneath the lake, where another golden light had begun to rise from below, larger than the others, brighter, and moving directly toward the station. The larger golden light moved silently through the dark water beyond the glass, illuminating the underground chamber with a warm glow that pushed back the shadows gathered along the walls. Daniel stood frozen beside the observation window while Rex pressed close against him, the dogs breathing calm but alert. The smaller figure shaped like Emily slowly faded backward into the darkness, as though guiding his attention toward the approaching light. Daniel wiped tears from his face with shaking hands and stared outward into the lake. The glow grew brighter until he could finally see what surrounded it. Hundreds of smaller lights drifting together beneath the frozen water like stars moving. Through the night sky, some pulsed softly blue. Others glowed pale gold. Each one carried faint shapes inside them. Faces, memories, moments frozen in light. The entire lake beneath Black Hollow had become a place where grief lingered long after voices disappeared from the world above. The old monitors around the chamber flickered alive again, displaying fragmented recordings from families speaking to loved ones who were no longer there. Daniel heard quiet laughter, birthday songs, bedtime prayers, tiny pieces of human memory suspended beneath the ice like echoes that refused to fade. The larger light stopped directly in front of the observation glass. Slowly, The glow shifted shape until Daniel could make out the outline of an older man wearing a winter military coat. His face remained blurry at first, but Daniel recognized him moments later from faded photographs upstairs. The researcher from the recordings. The man raised one hand gently toward the glass. Then the speakers overhead crackled softly. "We never meant to trap the memories here," the voice whispered through static. The lake amplified sorrow. Every person who entered carrying deep loss left a part of themselves behind. Daniel listened silently while the warm light flickered across the chamber walls. Most people forgot the voices after leaving. But children remembered. Emily remembered everything. The glowing figure outside slowly lowered its head. "She asked us not to shut the station down. She said lonely people would someday need this place." Daniel closed his eyes briefly as emotion tightened painfully inside his chest. For years after Emily died, he had wandered through life carrying grief like an invisible weight chained around his heart. He stopped talking to old friends, stopped celebrating holidays, stopped believing anything good could still exist in the world. Yet standing beneath the frozen lake now, surrounded by memories glowing softly in the darkness, he realized grief had never truly been emptiness. It was love with nowhere left to go. Rex suddenly lifted his head,